What you often see when people are starting to draw cylinders is that they'll spend a long time getting the angle of the top right, drawing the ellipse out. They'll draw the sides, try and get them nice and straight, but then when it comes to the base, more often than not, they'll draw the base too flat, like this. Now I'll explain why that isn't the case. Using this symbol to demonstrate, as you can see, when you're looking at it straight on, it's a circle. But at an angle, the circle becomes an ellipse. So let's say this is where the top of your object is, and you have a nice shallow ellipse here. As you go further down, the more of the circle you'll see, the wider of an ellipse there'll be, and more of a curve. If you go up again, the shallower the ellipse will be, less of a curve there will be, until if you go all the way up to eye level, the ellipse ends up becoming just a straight line. If you were to go higher, then it would start curving up. So if, let's say this is the top of your object, you would have quite a shallow ellipse. The base, if it were down here, there would be a wider ellipse, but what you would see is more of a curve at the bottom. And so if you wanted to correct the initial drawing here and make the base more curved, you can see that the proportions look a lot more real and the cylinder looks more believable. Now if you have drawn a cylinder out like this, a great idea is to work your way down slightly and draw an ellipse, how it would be seen if it was a little further down. Imagine if it was sliced through at this point, or even it was a glass of water, and then imagine if the water was that little bit lower. What would the ellipse be like now? Slightly wider. The base, it would be slightly wider again, similar to how we demonstrated with the symbol. And what I suggest is how I've done here. Each time, just start quite nice and loose, and work your way into it until you find exactly the ellipse that you're after. Now there are even more technical ways to help you draw out cylinders from all sorts of angles and get the ellipses right, and that's using 2 and 3 point perspective. And if you wanted to learn more about this, then this is something that I'll cover in another video on perspective and cubes. Now once you've drawn out a cylinder like this one here using line, you might want to make it look more three-dimensional. Now to do that, you need to shade it in with areas of light and dark. To work out which are going to be light and dark, you need a light source. In this instance, I've drawn an arrow to show that the light would be coming from the top left-hand corner. If this were the case, the shadow would be on the right-hand side, as I'm shading in now using cross-hatching. Another great way of shading would be using contour shading, where the lines that you use follow the shape and the contour of the curve to accentuate the three-dimensional qualities. Now if I add a little bit of tone over to the left as well, that might help accentuate the curve of the cylinder that bit further. And if you want to get a really smooth blend from light to dark, then you can just keep shading as you were until it gets a lot smoother. Notice here how I've left it a bit lighter over to the right hand side here. Now that's where you'd actually get a bit of light reflecting back off the table. The table itself will be affected by the cylinder. If the light's coming from the top left hand corner, then a shadow will come down across to the right hand side. If it starts at the front about here, the back wouldn't start where you finish seeing the cylinder here, but it would actually start from where the curve finishes at the back and come across. Once you've worked out where the shadow will be, then you start shading in. Here I'm using straighter, more horizontal lines. This will really accentuate the flat surface of the table. Another thing to consider with a shadow is the fact that they're always a lot darker nearer the object. So if you start shading a lot darker as the shadow meets the object, and then you can shade, gradually pressing less hard as you move out. To make the drawing even more effective and the cylinder really stand out that bit more, you could add tone into the background. A good way to do this is to draw a line where the back of the table might come, in this case about halfway up the cylinder. The background can then be shaded in much darker, like I'm doing here using hatching. Now creating this darker background will really push it back and bring the cylinder forward, creating much more depth to the drawing. And what you can also do is actually shade right up to the original outline, getting rid of it, but instead making it much more believable by you seeing the object as just where one tone meets another. Now the lightest area of the cylinder is the top, where the light really does hit it. But if it was actually going to be like a hollow cylinder, then you would need to shade this area in. And if the light's coming from the left, the shadow would be over to the left, and the light would pick up to the right. To make this look really effective, You'd start by shading it a much darker on the left and then gradually fade across, becoming slightly lighter as it goes across to the other side. All of these techniques I'm showing you are general ways of making a cylinder look really real. But once you've made up a cylinder like this, I strongly recommend that you actually find a cylindrical object and draw it from observation. Find a mug, for example, place it on the desk in front of you, and you can always use a lamp to get that strong light source. If you wanted to set it off with a darker background, then you could always add a piece of darker card behind your object. When drawing from observation, it's always worth starting really faint with your use of line, before then starting to shade in more of the midtones and then gradually getting darker. At the end, you can go really dark and start really getting those details in. After drawing one object, you could try more complicated setups like this one here, where there are lots of objects together. Now this is great practice for drawing multiple ellipses at different levels. It's also interesting to see how your shading might differ depending on the natural light or the surface qualities of your objects. You might want to use different media, like in this drawing here, where I'm using charcoals and chalk to represent a range of different sorts of shapes, including cubes, cones and cylinders. For now though, it's over to you. Have a go at practicing your ellipses and you'll be well on your way to drawing perfect cylinders. Enjoy your art and I'll see you next time.